All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hope Church. Welcome, everyone online. Great to see you guys today. How many of you, like me, have ever found yourself wishing that there were just more hours in the day? Have you ever gotten to that place where you're like, I could use more time? Oh, come on, don't leave me hanging. How many of you, all right, that looks like most of us. Have you ever wondered what you would actually do if you had more hours in the day? I thought, what would I do if I had more hours in the day? So I made a list. Here's what I would do. Number one, I'd work more on my sermons because I will live to serve, and I want you guys to have a great experience. I would spend more time with my family. I would enter some barbecue competitions. I would read more. Not like professional development, I already do that, but the staff is trying to convince me that this is the year I need to read a fiction book. So I'd start reading fiction books. I would, did I mention barbecue competitions? I would pick up guitar again and start playing music again. I'd definitely spend more time with my family, more time in nature. My golf game is terrible, so I would take a swing at lowering my handicap. And also, I've always wanted to learn Spanish. That's what I would do my first week of having more hours in my day, and then it would only go from there. And then I thought, you know what I would do with more hours in my day? I would be more exhausted, less rested than I am right now. What would you do if you actually had more hours in your day? The answer is you would probably do more of what you are currently doing with your day. If you're overscheduled now, you're going to be overscheduled if you could have more hours in your day. If a person is lazy now, they would be lazy with more hours in their day. If a person's frustrated because they spend too much time on social media during the day now, they would spend that more time doing that as well. If a person drinks too much right now, they're going to drink too much with their extra hours of the day. If you are exhausted right now, you would be exhausted with your extra hours of the day. Which means that the solution to our problem of being busy, of being hurried, of being distracted, isn't adding more hours to our day, which is good because we can't do that. You cannot manufacture hours, you cannot purchase hours, you cannot add hours to the day. Unless you're in the desert, you find an oil lamp, you rub it, and a genie comes out, but be careful. There's always a catch with those guys. But for the rest of us, we can't add hours in the day. So what do we assume about the way to deal with our overbusy lives? How do we fix that problem? We work harder. We squeeze more in. We learn time hacks. We learn how to be more efficient, effective, and productive. Now think about this for a minute. That means our default approach to dealing with the fact that we're too busy is to try and do more. Our default approach to the fact that we lead hurried lives is to hurry even more. That's not going to work. So what's driving this? What's driving our desires to do more, achieve more, see more, try more, travel more, accumulate more, accomplish more? What's behind all that? Well, if we could reduce it to just one word that explains all of our drives for more, that one word would be this one right here: desire. We have desires. Now, desires are innately a good thing. It was desire that got me out of bed this morning. See, I woke up early because I wanted to have quiet time with God. I wanted to get smoke rolling on my barbecue pit so I could enjoy a delicious dinner tonight. I wanted to be with you guys and open up the Bible with you and show you some things that I'm learning about following Jesus in this season of my life. And this is different for you guys. I work here. This is how I earn a living, and I wanted to earn some money so I could provide for my family. These are desires that got me out of bed this morning, because if I didn't have those desires, I can promise you nothing would have gotten me out of bed on a cold January morning in single-degree temperature where there's snow on the ground and I have to shovel my driveway after a Packers loss. There's just nothing going to get me out of bed today except for desire. Desire is good in our lives because it's a powerful motivator. It's good as long as it stays in the back seat of your life. It says, hey, can we do this? Can we go there? Can we pursue that? That'd be really good for us, we think. But desire becomes a problem once you allow it to climb behind the wheel of your life. And it begins to drive you. And it begins to make the decisions on which way your life is pointed. And the reason why it causes trouble when we let it behind the driver's seat is because whatever your desire is, it's like your appetite. It will never reach the place where it is finally and fully satisfied. Okay, now I learned this when I was about 7 years old. When I was 7, every afternoon at 4 o'clock, I would go to my mom and say, Mom, can I have a snack? And she would say, no, you'll ruin your appetite. And at 7, I already had this figured out. No, I won't. See, I've learned something, Mom. Every time I eat, my appetite eventually comes back. See, so I can have a snack and eat dinner. She never went for it. So the thing is with your appetites, you can feed your appetite, you can feed your desire, but it's not going to go away. It's going to come back. How many of you have the sweet tooth? And come on, you love you some chocolate. How many of you love okay, you will never get to the place in life where you eat a piece of chocolate and all of a sudden your eyes get big and you say, I'm good. I don't want any more chocolate. I finally hit that point where my desire was fulfilled. And no. See, desire just comes back and you want more. And it's true for every area of your life. Some of you, I've seen you. This is not pretty. Some of you, your desire is for more grandchildren. Okay. You just want more. There are never enough grandchildren, okay? I've seen it take over people's lives. You never get to the number of grandchildren where you say, I'm good. I don't want any more grandchildren. For some of us, it's money. Money is a good thing. It's an important tool. It's a blessing from God. But if it gets behind the driver's wheel of your life, you will never get to the point where that one more dollar comes in and you say, oh, I am so satisfied. I finally reached the threshold. No, when it drives your life, you will always want more. For some of us, it's alcohol. And you desire the numbing relief that alcohol brings to your life. And if someone desires that, you will never be content with your current level of emotional pain. For some of us, it's just nicer, newer, house, car, clothes, whatever, it doesn't matter. That desire is never going to be satisfied because there is always a nicer one out there. So that's the problem when we let desire behind the wheel of our lives and make the decision for us. And by the way, once it takes the wheel, do you know the destination it's going to drive you to? Exhaustion. Burnout. Desire is great in the backseat. It's a terrible driver because it always takes you to the same destination. Now, there's actually a reason theologically why this happens in our life. And here's kind of an interesting idea. You probably don't think about it this way, but here's what I want to talk about today. We are finite. Desire is infinite. We are finite. We inhabit time and space. We are limited in what we can do, what we can accomplish, where we go, etc. But our desires will never be finally and fully satisfied. What you might not know is this was hardwired into your very DNA. If you open up the Bible and you read the Genesis creation account, it says two fascinating things about humanity and the way that we were created that live in tension with each other. The first way we were created is this, Genesis 1. So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. We were created in the image of God, to love like God, to create like God, to develop beautiful things like God, to rule over creation like God. And our desire is for God Himself because we were made in His image. We were always incomplete without being in the presence of God to reflect His love, glory, beauty, majesty to Him. We have that infinite desire for God hardwired into our very souls. Yet at the same time, we are finite. A few verses later, we're told this, then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. We are finite. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, earth to earth. So we carry this tension within us. And see, desires, they become problematic when they're disordered. As long as you let your desire for God and His goodness and His beauty and His love and His purpose and His plan and His pleasure be at the driver's seat of your life, and all those other things, those are good desires for things that God made and God blessed you with. And that's fine because you're pursuing all those good things that God has for you. Family, career, wealth, whatever it is, pleasure. God invented all those things. Those are all part of His good design. And He designed them because He loves us. He loves pleasure. He loves goodness. He loves people. He loves productivity. That's who he is. He's a God who creates. But when we let those desires become disordered, where they overtake our love for God, that's when the desires lead to exhaustion, to fatigue, to burnout. I've seen this over and over in my own life. I have a tendency, I always have, to overwork. Now, work is a good thing. It's a blessing from God. We're going to unpack this a little bit next week, but that was part of his creation design. And if you've ever been out of work when you wanted to have a job, you know how terrible it is to be out of work and what a blessing work is in our lives. But to overwork, what I mean by that is it spills out of its proper boundaries and floods some other areas of life that are also of value to me, but they get suffocated beneath it because I let it overflow that. Now, what drives that? What's that desire that has become out of alignment, that's become too important to me, that I let take the wheel? Well, it's been different at different seasons of life. And I'm sharing this just so you see how it works and because you guys are cheaper than therapy. So, very early when I was a young pastor and new at Hope, honestly, the desire was that I didn't want the church to close. It was survival. It was that fear of failure and the need for survival that really drove my overwork. So it's no surprise that I was tired in that season. I wasn't letting just love for God and serving people and talking about Jesus drive me. It was that fear. Then I went to a different season after, okay, we're going to make it. Church is going to make it. Then I went to a season more of wanting to prove myself as a young man. I said, no, I can do this job. See, look how competent I am. I want people to look up to me, to respect me, to admire me, say, wow, look at what Jason can do. So there's a lot of insecurity behind that, driving that. And of course, when that's your desire driving your life, that's going to lead to exhaustion. Then more recently, I've noticed this pattern coming up. Tell me if this makes sense. I think to myself, if I can just get enough done, if I can cross enough things off my to-do list, I'll finally be able to push back from my desk and exhale and relax in that part of my brain that won't stop thinking about work. It'll finally shut down because look at how much I got done, I can rest. To which you say, okay, Jason, your strategy is to hurry more to deal with your hurry. Is that what I'm hearing? Oh, and by the way, as you do that, the church tends to keep growing, which means there's more people, more needs, more meetings, more decisions. So that's your plan, huh? Maybe. See, this is why I'm actually in counseling all the time. I'm just not that smart. But listen, we do this all the time when we let anything other than our desire for God and His glory and His beauty and His love to drive our lives. The destination is going to be exhaustion. And that's why all series long we've been looking at this invitation from Jesus, this beautiful invitation that He offers everyone who's tired, everyone who's exhausted, everyone who's worn out. Here's the invitation He gives. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke." Again, that's a way of life. That's a set of teachings. That's an approach to life. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. What's the heart of Jesus? He's gentle, He's kind, He's humble. That's who He is in His heart. And you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So in this series, we've been looking, and we will continue to look at some spiritual habits that will allow you to enter the easy yoke, the kind yoke of Jesus. That leads to both a rested and productive life, just like Jesus. He led a rested and a productive life. Now, last week we learned the first spiritual habit, and by the way, a spiritual habit, it's not a term that's thrown around much at work. Spiritual habit is something you do with your mind and body to posture yourself in a way that aligns yourself, your life, your mind, your heart, your soul, with God, with the Creator. It's just habits you can take up, practical habits, daily habits, that when you employ them, it will more and more align your inner life with the heartbeat of your Creator. So last week we learned the first one that we're talking about, silence and solitude. It's time alone every day with God and with your own soul. That's what silence and solitude is. It's just time alone with God and with your own soul every day in silence and solitude. Now, I've gotten the best feedback from last week's message. If you missed last week, you owe it to yourself to go online and watch. Unless you're not busy, then you don't have to. But if God seems far away, distant, or if you're just busy, you need to check out last week's message because in silence and solitude, we realign our hearts with God and have a place to exhale. Now, the feedback I've gotten this week was basically something like this. Okay, Jason, you challenged us to try it for 5 minutes a day. I set my timer. I made it 3 minutes. Okay, Jason, I tried it like you said, and it was like someone was flipping the channels in my brain the whole time. Dear God, I would like to pray today, meeting at 3. Someone's flipping the channels. Now, does that sound familiar to anyone where you like try and pray and your mind just wanders off, flitters off? Okay, do you know what that means? That doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you're a human person. That's all that means, okay? And that's okay. And as you go into silence and solitude, here's the mindset you need to have. Every time your brain wanders off and you notice it, you catch yourself, oh, I'm not here to be in God's presence. My mind has wandered off. That's your chance to once again take Jesus' invitation to come back to him, you who are weary and burdened. And every time you do, he's going to be so delighted because he says, I'm gentle and humble in heart, and I want you to have rest for your soul. Every time your mind wanders off, it's a time, it's an opportunity, it's a blessing, it's an invitation to come back and focus it again on God and his goodness. And he's so delighted. And if you get to the end of your 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, and you're like, I think I got 30 seconds on God today, and the rest of the time my mind was wandering off somewhere. If you say, but God, I'm coming back tomorrow to do it again, God's going to be so honored and delighted to spend that time with you. So silence and solitude, it's a daily spiritual habit that over time, it'll completely change your heart and life. Today's habit is one that if you thought last week was brutal, this is one that almost all of us are going to push back on and say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, okay? So I just want to vocalize it before you vocalize it in your own head. Because I know that when I'm preaching, I have the microphone, but your brain is talking as well. So it's going to reject this one. Here's today's spiritual habit. Embrace your limitations. How un-American is that? We live in a culture that says, chase your dream, be anything you want to be, do anything you want to do. See all the shows, go to all the movies, see all the concerts, read all the news stories, keep up to date with everything that's going on, travel to all the countries, to get all the stamps in your passport, eat at every restaurant, and don't forget to make your own dent in the universe. Eat more, buy more, check out more, see more, do more, visit more, hang out with your friends more, watch more, hashtag YOLO, hashtag FOMO, hashtag I'm so exhausted I'm having a breakdown, yo. That's the culture we live in, a culture that transgresses all limitations and says, just do more, just experience more. Have you heard about the latest version of FOMO that's been identified by psychologists? It's called entertainment anxiety. See, FOMO is a real thing. Fear of missing out is a real thing, but entertainment anxiety is a real anxiety that people are experiencing when someone says, hey, did you check out the show? And they're like, oh no, I'm already 2 seasons behind on the show I want to watch. Now here's another show I have to watch if I want to be in the know and cool and cultured and hip. Does anybody ever feel that, man, I just can't keep up with what's going on in culture anymore? That's entertainment anxiety. We live in a culture that pushes against all limitations. Today, what we're going to see is that the secret to living a rested and productive life is to embrace the fact that as a human being who was made out of dust, you have limitations. Because here's what happens if you transgress this reality. If you live as if you are limitless, do you know what happens to your schedule? You allow more and more things to fill it up, and you get busier and busier and busier. And the things that are filling up your schedule, you're not being discerning about it. Because you're not embracing your limits, you're not being discerning about what you do with your limited time, and the things that you're busy with, if you honestly evaluate it, they're not things that you would say, this is making my life meaningful. This is making my life valuable. This is what matters with my life. See, if we live as if we have no limits, as if we will live forever, we'll let anything, because we'll eventually have time to get to whatever we want to get to. But if we live within the confines of limits, we will become incredibly wise and incredibly discerning on what we do with our limited time, our limited ability, and the limited capacity that we have. See, here's what I'm going to show you today. The limits in your life, that's like a form. And it's a form created by God. And we were meant to pour our lives into that form and as a result create something beautiful. But when we overflow those limits, our lives become a mess. Now, this isn't my idea. I didn't come up with any of this. I don't come up with anything I preach. This is something that we learned from a man who lived a very long time ago by the name of Moses. Moses lived around the year 1500 BC. If you've ever seen the movie Ten Commandments, if you're in an older generation, or Prince of Egypt, if you're in a younger generation. Moses was a man who was born into a Hebrew household at a time when the Hebrew people were slaves of one of the Egyptian dynasties. And it was at a time where the slaves were becoming so populous that the Pharaoh had issued an order that baby boys must be killed. Moses was born. His mother was not going to let that happen, so she hid him in the Nile River, and Pharaoh's daughter happened to come across him, found him, took compassion on him, and decided to adopt this child as her own son. She named him Moses, which means I drew him up out of the water. And Moses was raised as the adopted grandson of the Pharaoh. He grew up as a prince of Egypt. He grew up in royalty, best education, best food, best entertainment, best everything. And he did this until he was 40 years old. But as he got older, he knew he was different. He knew he wasn't one of the Egyptians. And he began to identify with his family of blood, not his family of adoption. So one day when he sees a Hebrew slave overseer beating a Hebrew slave, he kills the Egyptian slave overlord. He's just so frustrated to see this Egyptian harming one of his fellow Hebrew people that he kills him, buries his body in the sand, but somebody sees the whole thing. Word gets out, and Moses, well, he transgressed his limitations. He thought he could be judge, jury, and executioner. And as a result of pushing back against his limitations, he had to run for his life, had to abandon everything, runs out to the desert, spends the next 40 years of his life as a shepherd in the desert. And suddenly, all that education, all that learning, all that goodness means nothing. Every day when the sun comes up, he takes his sheep out to pasture. When the sun goes down, he brings his sheep in. That's his life for the next 40 years. Then God comes to him and says, okay, time to get to work. You are going to be the one who liberates my people. Moses goes back to Egypt, leads the people out of Egypt, through the desert and to the promised land. So Moses had 3 distinct phases of his life. All of them were radically different. And as a result, he had a very unique perspective on understanding the limitations we have as humans, specifically when it comes to our limited capacity of time, our limited amount of time. Now, again, I think Moses is a valid person to learn from because he got a little bit more done with his life than you did. I mean, freed a nation of 2 million people from slavery and economic bondage and led them and established them as a new nation, as a promised land. Not a bad life's work, okay? So we're going to learn from him how to embrace limitations and see the power this has for making us both happy and productive in our day-to-day lives. Now, we're going to learn about this in Psalm 90. Moses wrote one psalm of the 150 psalms you can find in the Bible. And a psalm that's kind of poetic, more of a song or a poem than narrative or prose. But as he writes, he just writes with such amazing insight. Here's what he wrote, Psalm 90. He said, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. So Moses begins this psalm where he's going to talk about embracing our limitations. He begins by setting the context for life. And when he looks at the context of life, he doesn't zoom out to your birth and death. He doesn't zoom out to his grandparents or zoom out to the beginning of even creation. He zooms out even further than that, and he goes to everlasting past. And when he looks at everlasting past, there is God, because we have to remember that before there was a universe, there was no time. Time was invented with the universe. As were matter and space and energy, all of a sudden they sprang into existence. Now, if you believe the Big Bang, if you believe God created, however, those things all came into creation at the same time. But when he looks back before there wasn't anything, there was God in eternity past. He's not beneath the construct of time as we are. And when he looks forward to eternity future, there again is God. And this, he says, is the proper context for your life. The proper context for life is from everlasting to everlasting. See, we get tunnel visioned. What do I have to get done today? What do I have to get done this week? Maybe you even have some annual goals for 2022. All those are great. Get your stuff done. Have some goals. But Moses says, but if you want to understand the context, we have to zoom way out. Before there is anything, there is God. After everything, there is God. So with that context, he gets to the psalm. Verse 3. You, God, turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. He is saying this is the destination every living thing will get to. Return to dust because we were made from dust. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or it's worse than that, like a watch in the night. The night was broken up into 4 3-hour chunks. Each of those 3-hour chunks was called a watch. And he says, God, from your context of everlasting to everlasting, my life on earth is like a watch in the night. It's that short. That's how long 1,000 years are to you. So if 1,000 years are like a 3-hour night shift, your life, let's say it's 80 years, that's about 15 minutes in the context of eternity. From the time you're born, everything you learn, pursue, do, create, to the time of your death, in the context of eternity, Moses said, it's about 15 minutes compared to everlasting to everlasting. You sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning, though in the morning it springs up new, by evening it is dry and withered. Now, he's not saying that your life is unimportant. What he's saying is everything we can build with our lives, everything we worry about, everything we fear, everything we're concerned about, everything we get greedy about. He said, just so you know, it's like a hot summer day where the grass is there in the morning and by evening it's withered and dry, because our life is brief. Not because you don't matter, because your life on earth is brief. He says this a few verses later. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. What's crazy is he wrote this 3,500 years ago. And that's still our life expectancy today. About 79 years in America. That's about 950 months. It's about 4,000 weeks of our limited time. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass, and we fly away. See, what he's saying is, even the best life, there's going to be pain. Even if all your dreams come true, there's still going to be tears. There's still going to be sorrow. And again, he's not saying your life is unimportant. What's he saying? The point of all of this is that your life is limited. Your life is limited. Live as if your days are numbered, because they are numbered. Now, here's just a few examples of limits that you have in your life. There's more than this, but there's just some examples of what I'm talking about. Your body. You're not omnipresent. You can be in one place at one time, which means by the fact that you are human, you have limits. You can only do so much. You can only stay awake so long before you need sleep. By the way, did you know that people who need less than 8 hours of sleep, I don't know how much sleep you get, but scientifically this has been proven, the number of people who actually can be perfectly healthy with less than 8 hours of sleep, well, you're 8 times more likely to win a gold medal in the Olympics. Okay, almost all of us need 8 hours of sleep a night to be fully healthy. We have limits because we occupy bodies. Your mind, okay? Your brain can only focus on one thing at a time. Some of you think you're multitasking. You're not. You're pivoting back and forth between two things and eroding your capacity to focus on either of them. And you have an IQ. We don't all have the same IQ. We don't all have the same mental capacity, but your brain, your mind, is a limiting factor for your life. It just is. Your gifting and natural ability. There's some things you're good at. There are some things you're not good at. Nobody's good at everything. And because of what you're good at, what your gifting is, what your abilities are, we're limited. Your personality. You are hardwired up with a certain personality. Some of us are extroverts. Some of us are introverts. I mean, I look at what I do for a living and I'm like, man, I have the wrong personality for this. I'm an introvert. I have a little bit of melancholy thrown in. I see some pastors work. They can walk in. They are a ball of energy. They light up a room. They come in and say, let's go, everyone. And I do that. I'm like, that just looks dumb. That's not who I am. I can't do that. And I look at other pastors. They can do more. They can carry more. They can work more. And I'm like, I just can't do that. That's not how I'm wired up by God. And you have limits because of your hardwired personality as well. There are people you look at and you're like, man, I wish I could do that. I wish I were that person. On the flip side, there are things you have that other people wish they had. But we all have limits when it comes to your personality, your family of origin. Hey, listen, some people start on first base in life because of their family of origin. Some start in the parking lot. Some people are born into generational poverty. Some people are raised in homes where their parents have a very low emotional intelligence and don't know how to communicate unconditional love and acceptance to their children. We didn't choose our family of origin, and there's a real factor there. Maybe it's your season of life. If you have little kids at home, you can just call them limitation 1 and limitation 2, all right? When we're young, like college age, right out of college, we tend to be limited by the amount of money we have, but you're never going to have more time, okay? If you're in college or recently out of college, you think you're busy. It's my favorite thing about pre-marriage class, these young couples telling me that they're pretty busy right now. I'm like, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so you're you're limited by money, but you have more time. As you get established in a career, raise a family, you'll probably have more money, but you're going to have more expenses, so you're still limited on money, and now you're limited on time. Well, but your season of life brings you limitations. Your biology, okay? Maybe you have asthma. Maybe there's something about your biology. It's just a limitation. Maybe you come from a line of people who have depression. Maybe your parents and grandparents had that, or high cholesterol. Whatever it is, your biology is a limiting factor, and all of us have this one thing in common. You get 24 hours a day, and we're limited by our time. Now, we can either push back against this and pretend these limits don't exist and aren't real, or we can see them as the forms God has put around our life, so that we can pour our lives into whatever God planned for us and create something beautiful as a result. Moses says, embrace your limits. Understand that life is brief, and we have this small moment. We can't do everything. Be discerning and wise so that you can build a life within your limits that is meaningful and valuable and purposeful and makes a difference. Now, here's why we don't like to do this. Because to embrace limits means that you have to make some decisions. You have to decide some things you're going to say no to. Some opportunities you're going to miss, some people you're going to disappoint, some people who will never be okay with your decisions. Now, here's what's interesting. Do you know where the word decide comes from? It comes from the Latin word caido, which in Latin means to kill. Caido, as in homicide, genocide, suicide, decide. Every time you make a decision, do you know what you're doing? You are killing a possible future. And that's the reason why for many of us, we don't want to make hard decisions about embracing our limits because well, if I make this decision, then that's never going to happen. Yep. It's not going to happen because you can't do it all. You can't be everywhere. You don't have infinite time. You have infinite desires, but you have a finite body. So how can we align our lives with the infinite desire of God and let that drive us so we can put all these other desires we have that are good if they're in the back seat? They're all good desires if they're in the back seat. How do we let them come along for the ride? While we're pursuing the purposes of God in our lives. Moses brings it all home in verse 12. He says, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. If you have ever gotten married, you know how to number your days, don't you? Ask any bride, how long till your wedding? She knows the days, doesn't she? 265 days and 15 minutes. If you have ever had a big project due, you knew how to number your days, didn't you? It was always in the back of your mind, I have this much time to get it done. If you were ever going on a really fun vacation and you were looking forward to that vacation, you knew how to number your days. And isn't it amazing that once you begin numbering your days, you make extraordinary decisions on what you need to get done and what you can ignore? Isn't that amazing? Have you ever noticed that? Moses said, what if you took your approach to marriage, your approach to projects, your approach to vacation, what if you lived your whole life that way? See, when you're getting ready to go on vacation, you're like, I'm limited. I have to embrace my limitations if I'm going to prioritize and execute what is actually going to matter in my life. If we lived as if our days are numbered, we would gain extraordinary wisdom on how to live a productive, purposeful, intentional life. Now, this idea of limiting our lives, our behaviors, our actions, and embracing our limits. For me personally, this is, again, one of my applications. I brought it up 2 weeks ago. This is one of the big reasons why this summer I'm taking a sabbatical. Sabbatical means for 3 months I'm stepping away from my day job to focus on refueling my tanks. Emotionally, spiritually, it's just been a long season. Do you know why? Because I have a limited number of days to be the pastor at Hope Church. Now, I hope it's a long time from now, but it's still a limited number. And if I'm going to make the most of these days, and if we're going to do the most good in God's kingdom, I need to be at 100% so we can make the most of every limited day that we have to change lives and eternities. Now, what if you started approaching life this way? What if tomorrow morning you walked into work saying to yourself, there will be a last day at this job? You would gain so much clarity around your work and your career, and you would get it quickly. If you raised your kids recognizing there will be a last day when I am raising these children, you would gain so much clarity and wisdom about how to make the most of the limited time that you have. If you approached your marriage understanding, listen, there's going to be a last day of your marriage. If you embraced that limitation, you would not take it for granted. You would not take them for granted. And you would gain so much wisdom and discernment on what to do with your very real limits. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Here's your homework. What's one thing you must eliminate to embrace your limitations? Here's another way to think of the question. What's something that's occupying your time that isn't creating a joyful, purposeful, valuable life? What's one thing you need to eliminate to embrace your limitations? Now, last thing. This is not morbid. This should not depress you. Some of you, you're listening, you're like, this sucks, we're all going to die. Here's why this doesn't suck, even though we are going to turn to dust. We are. Here's why it doesn't suck. Verse 2 again. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. When Jesus died on a cross, he had made the most of his limited time. 33 years on this planet. When he gave his life as a payment for your sin. And then 3 days later, on Easter Sunday, he walked out of his tomb into resurrected life. Resurrected life. And he promised, because I live, you also shall live. You will follow me through death and into resurrected life. And when Jesus returns, he will bring the kingdom of heaven down to earth, and he will unite heaven and earth forever, and we will rise to live resurrected life with God, with Jesus, forever. We will be with him in righteousness. This money is not the only money you will ever have. This time is not the only time you will ever have. This opportunity is not the only opportunity you will ever have. We will rise to resurrected life. Our context for life is eternity. You get 15 minutes now, 70 or 80 years, more or less. And if we embrace that reality, you will gain a heart of wisdom. And you will live as if your days are numbered, but more importantly, you will live as if your days matter. And because Jesus died for you, we know that your entire life matters. Next week, we're going to wrap up this series. We're going to celebrate communion as a church next week. But right now, let's close in prayer. Father, nothing in our world is teaching us your wisdom. We're going to walk out into a world this morning, and everything is going to tell us to do more, pursue more. Father, that's not leading to joy, that's leading to exhaustion. So give us your wisdom. Teach us to number our days that we can have your discernment in our lives so that our lives can truly be meaningful and valuable and purposeful and good. Every morning, may we realign our desires and hopes and dreams on you and you alone, because only you can satisfy all of our desires with your goodness and grace. I ask that we'll have the wisdom and the courage to trust you and to learn how to say no, because you've established our lives with limits. And that's where we find true flourishing. So give us your wisdom, Holy Spirit. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.